Jung-Hoon was the king of the Seoul underworld, a man who never blinked in the face of death, until the woman he shared his bed with put a gun to his heart. Sia didn't just take his money, she sold his soul to the highest bidder and watched him plunge into a watery grave. She thought she had won. She thought the dead stayed buried. But 2 years later, on the night of her engagement to another man, a single black lily appears on her pillow with a note, "I survived the river. Can you survive me?" The rain that night was a witness to the greatest betrayal the city had ever seen. Jung-Hoon stood at the edge of the pier, blood blooming like a dark flower through his white dress shirt. He didn't look at the dozen barrels aimed at his chest, he looked at Sia. She was holding the blue ledger, the only thing that could destroy him, and her eyes were as cold as the steel in her hand. "I loved you," he whispered, the words lost in the roar of the storm. "I used you," she replied, her voice steady even as her fingers trembled. A single shot rang out, and the king fell. For 2 years, Sia lived in a golden cage of her own making, convinced that the eraser of her past was gone. But as she walks down the aisle of the city's grandest cathedral, the lights flicker and die. In the sudden, suffocating darkness, a hand, scarred, cold, and terrifyingly familiar, covers her mouth. The Mafia Boss is back, and he isn't looking for his money. He's looking for the one thing she can't give back, the 3 years of his life she turned into a lie. The sirens were a dissonant chorus against the jagged skyline of Seoul, their blue and red lights fracturing against the rain-slicked concrete of the Mapo Bridge. Jung-Hoon stood at the epicenter of the chaos, the wind whipping his charcoal overcoat like the wings of a fallen crow. He was surrounded. To his left, the tactical units of the Seoul Metropolitan Police held their line. To his right, the heavy shadows of the rival Baekho clan waited to scavenge what was left of his empire. Yet, Jung-Hoon didn't look at the barrels of the rifles or the cold, hungry eyes of his enemies. He looked only at Sia. She stood 3 paces away, her silk dress clinging to her frame like a second, shimmering skin. In her hands, she held the small, blue-bound ledger, the King's Heart, a document containing every bribe, every execution, and every secret that held the city's underworld in its grip. It was the only thing Jung-Hoon had ever truly hidden, and he had hidden it with her, believing her love was the only vault in the world that could never be cracked. "Sia," he rasped, his voice barely a tremor against the howling gale. "Step away from them. There is still a way out." She didn't move toward him. Instead, she turned her gaze toward the lead detective, a man whose career had been built on a failed pursuit of the very man she now held in her palm. With a hand that didn't shake, she extended the ledger. "Everything you need to bury him is in here," she said, her voice cutting through the rain with a clinical, devastating clarity. "The bank accounts, the disposal sites, the names of the senators. It's all over." The betrayal hit Jung-Hoon harder than any bullet ever could. It was a physical weight, a crushing pressure that emptied the air from his lungs. He had burnt down half the city to build a throne for her, only to realize she had been the architect of his gallows all along. "Why?" he whispered, the word lost to the storm. Sia didn't answer. She didn't have to. The look in her eyes wasn't one of hatred, it was the hollow, terrifying void of a woman who had never been there at all. "Fire!" The command shattered the silence. A single, high-caliber round tore through the air, catching Jung-Hoon in the shoulder and spinning him backward. The impact was an explosion of white heat. He stumbled, his heels catching the edge of the rusted railing. For a heartbeat, he hung suspended between the burning world of the living and the dark invitation of the water below. He locked eyes with her one last time as he tipped over the edge. He didn't see regret in her face, only the cold satisfaction of a job completed. Then, the black mouth of the Han River rose up to meet him, swallowing the King of Seoul in a freezing, silent embrace. 2 years had transformed the memory of blood into the sheen of gold. The name Jung-Hoon was now a ghost story whispered in the backrooms of bars, a legend of a fallen king whose throne had been dismantled to pave the streets of a cleaner city. Sia moved through this new world with the practiced grace of a queen who had survived a revolution. Her life was a masterpiece of curated elegance, a penthouse overlooking the shimmering lights of Gangnam, a seat at the most exclusive tables, and a diamond engagement ring that caught the light like a shard of ice. Her fiancé, Detective Kong, the man celebrated as the hero who had finally purged the city's darkness, was her ultimate security. In his arms, she was supposed to be safe. In his world, the past was a closed ledger, buried at the bottom of the Han River. But the shadows had begun to grow teeth. It started on a Tuesday, the air thick with the humidity of a looming storm. When Sia stepped onto her private terrace to greet the dawn, she found it waiting for her. Resting on the pristine marble of her doorstep was a single black lily. Its petals were so dark they looked like bruised velvet, and its scent was cloying, heavy with the smell of damp earth and funeral parlors. Sia's breath hitched. A cold, familiar dread coiled in the pit of her stomach. The black lily had been Jung-Hoon's calling card, a floral death warrant sent to those who dared to cross the syndicate. It was a signature of power, a silent promise that the king was watching. "It's just a prank," Kong had told her that evening, tossing the flower into the trash with a dismissive laugh. "Some low-level thug trying to play on your nerves. Jung-Hoon is fish food, Sia. I saw the blood. I saw the fall." But the next night, there were 2. Then 3. By the end of the week, the lilies appeared everywhere. She found one tucked into the sun visor of her car. Another was left on her table at a charity gala while she had stepped away for only a moment. There were no notes, no threats, and no footprints. Just the flowers, silent and suffocating. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyscrapers, Sia stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her bedroom. She touched the glass, her reflection overlapping with the dark city below. For the first time in 2 years, the silence of the penthouse felt less like peace and more like a tomb. She closed her eyes, and for a fleeting, terrifying second, she didn't hear the hum of the air conditioner. Instead, she heard the rhythmic splash of water against a bridge and a low, gravelly voice whispering her name through the rain. The dead didn't send flowers. But as she looked down at the doorstep and saw a fresh bouquet of black velvet petals shivering in the wind, Sia realized that perhaps Jung-Hoon hadn't been a man at all. He was a debt that was finally coming due. The Grand Hyatt ballroom was a dizzying kaleidoscope of gold leaf, champagne, and velvet masks. It was a celebration of the city's elite, a night where the powerful hid behind porcelain faces and silk lace. Sia moved through the crowd like a swan, her hand resting on Detective Kang's arm, but her pulse was a frantic, irregular drum. Every masked man who brushed past her sent a jolt of ice through her veins. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward her, clutching a handful of black lilies. "You're trembling," Kong whispered, his voice warm against her ear. "The security is tight, Sia. No one gets in without an invitation." She tried to smile, but the expression felt brittle. "I just need a moment to breathe. The heat is overwhelming." Stepping away from the music, Sia slipped into the quiet of the West Wing gallery. The air was cooler here, the light dimmed to protect the ancient tapestries. She leaned against a cold marble pillar, closing her eyes, trying to convince herself that the lilies were a hallucination, a product of a guilty conscience. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the end of the hall clicked shut. The lights flickered and died, plunging the gallery into a thick, absolute velvet. Before she could scream, a hand, strong, calloused, and freezing cold, clamped over her mouth. She was hauled backward with terrifying force, her back hitting a wall in a small, windowless cloakroom. The scent hit her first, the sharp metallic tang of rain mixed with the expensive, smoky cologne Jung-Hoon had worn for 1,000 nights. A low, gravelly vibration traveled through the darkness, vibrating against her skin. "Did you think the river was deep enough, Sia?" A small, handheld flashlight clicked on, positioned low, casting long, monstrous shadows upward. Sia's breath hitched in a jagged sob. The face before her was the one from her nightmares, yet altered. A jagged, silvered scar now traced a path from his temple to his jaw, the signature of the bullet that had tried to end him. His eyes, once warm with a love that had blinded him, were now twin shards of permafrost. Jung-Hoon, she choked out, her voice a broken whisper. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned in closer, his thumb tracing the line of her throat with a feather-light touch that felt like the edge of a blade. The heat of his body was gone, replaced by a crystalline chill that seemed to radiate from his very soul. "You look beautiful in white," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her engagement ring. "It's a pity. It's such a difficult color to clean blood from." He didn't strike her. He didn't reach for the knife she knew he carried. He simply stood there, letting her feel the sheer, overwhelming weight of his presence, the reality that her protector was a fraud and her victim was a god. "I'm not here to kill you tonight, Sia," he whispered, his breath ghosting over her lips. "I'm here to remind you that I still own every breath you take. Run back to your hero. Tell him the king has come home." Then, as quickly as the darkness had taken her, he was gone. The door creaked open, the hallway lights surged back to life, and Sia was left alone in the silence, her heart shattering against the realization that the nightmare was no longer a ghost, it was her new reality. 3 years ago, the world knew Jung-Hoon as a man of stone. In the dark alleys of Seoul, his name was a warning. He was the boss of a shadow empire, a man who spoke in threats and settled debts with blood. But when he was with Sia, the monster disappeared. To her, he was not a king, he was a man who brought her wild jasmine and read her poetry under the soft glow of the moon. They had met on a rainy night at a small library. Sia had looked so innocent, like a bird with a broken wing. Jung-Hoon, who had never trusted anyone, found himself opening the iron gates of his heart for her. He showed her a side of himself that no one else saw, the man who loved old movies, the man who dreamed of a life far away from the crime and the killing. He bought her a house by the sea and promised that one day, he would leave the mafia behind for her. He gave her his secret ledger, his heart, and his life, believing he had finally found peace. But every kiss Sia gave him was a lie. Every, "I love you," she whispered in the dark was a dagger she was sharpening for his back. While Jung-Hoon looked at her with love, Sia only saw the face of the organization that had destroyed her world. 5 years before they met, her older brother had been a witness to a mafia hit. He was a kind boy who just wanted to be a teacher, but the syndicate had ended his life to keep him quiet. Sia had stood over his grave and made a silent, burning promise, she would make the man at the top pay. She had spent years studying Jung-Hoon. She learned his habits, his favorite books, and his deepest fears. She crafted herself into the perfect woman for him, a gentle soul that a hardened criminal would want to protect. Her romance was not a story of love, it was a long, slow hunt. Every time he held her hand, she felt a wave of disgust, but she hid it behind a sweet smile. She wasn't his girlfriend, she was his ghost, waiting for the perfect moment to pull the ground from beneath his feet. Jung-Hoon thought he was protecting a princess, but he was actually feeding a wolf. He never realized that the woman he called his angel was the only person in the world who truly wanted him dead. The morning after the masquerade ball, Sia's perfect world began to fall apart. It did not happen with a loud bang, but with the cold, quiet precision of a spider spinning a web. When she tried to pay for her coffee at her favorite shop, her gold credit card was declined. She laughed it off as a mistake, but when she checked her phone, her heart stopped. Every single one of her bank accounts was frozen. The millions of dollars she had taken from Jung-Hoon's empire were gone, replaced by a balance of zero and a single message on the screen, "Did you think you could keep what you didn't earn?" By noon, the disaster reached her fiancé, Detective Khan. He was usually the golden boy of the news, the hero who had cleaned up the streets. But suddenly, the television screens in the city were filled with a different story. Anonymous files had been leaked to every major newspaper. They weren't just rumors, they were photos and recordings. They showed Kong taking money from the same criminals he was supposed to be arresting. They showed him shaking hands with the shadows. Sia sat on her expensive velvet sofa, watching the news in horror. She saw the man she was supposed to marry being shouted at by reporters. His hero reputation was melting away like ice in the sun. She realized then that Jung-Hoon wasn't just back to scare her. He was taking away the things she loved most, her money and her safety. He was stripping her life bare, piece by piece, just like she had done to him on the bridge 2 years ago. Every time her phone buzzed, it was a new nightmare. Her landlord called to tell her she was being evicted. Her high society friends stopped answering her texts. She was becoming a ghost in her own city. She looked out the window and saw a black car idling at the curb. It didn't move. It just sat there, watching her. She felt like a bird trapped in a cage that was getting smaller every second. Jung-Hoon had always told her that in the Mafia, the worst punishment wasn't death, it was being left with nothing. Now, she was learning that lesson the hard way. He was still the king of the shadows, and he was pulling the strings of her life until there was nothing left for her to hold on to. She was no longer the hunter, she was the prey, and the web was closing in. In the dark world of the Mafia, loyalty was supposed to be everything. But for a man named Viper, loyalty had a price. Viper had once been Jung-Hoon's most trusted shadow, his second-in-command who knew every secret and every hideout. He was the one who had whispered in Sia's ear 2 years ago, giving her the codes to the safe and the location of the bridge. Without Viper's help, Sia's revenge would have been impossible. Viper thought he was being smart by helping the king fall so he could take the crown for himself. But Viper had forgotten one thing, a king like Jung-Hoon never truly dies. Sia was sitting in her darkened apartment, clutching a cold cup of tea, when her phone vibrated with a loud buzz. It wasn't a text message this time. It was a video file from an unknown number. Her fingers shook as she pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing a damp, gray basement lit by a single swinging light bulb. In the center of the room, tied to a heavy metal chair, was Viper. His expensive suit was torn, and his face was bruised. He looked terrified, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. He wasn't the powerful boss he pretended to be, he looked small and weak. Then, a shadow moved into the frame. Jung-Hoon stepped into the light, looking as calm as if he were taking a walk in the park. He didn't use a gun or a knife. He just stood there, staring at Viper with cold, empty eyes. "You sold me out for a seat at a table that wasn't yours." Jung-Hoon's voice was a low, scary growl. "You thought the water was deep enough to hide your sins." In the video, Viper began to beg. He cried and promised to give back all the money. He even tried to blame Sia, saying it was all her idea. But Jung-Hoon didn't say a word. He just leaned down and whispered something into Viper's ear that made the man turn as white as a sheet. The video ended abruptly, cutting to a black screen with 3 simple words, "He talked, Sia." Sia dropped her phone on the floor. Her heart was racing so fast she could feel it in her throat. She realized that Jung-Hoon wasn't just destroying her money or her reputation. He was hunting down every person who had helped her. Viper was a dangerous man, a professional killer, and Jung-Hoon had caught him like he was nothing. She looked at the door of her apartment, suddenly feeling like the locks weren't strong enough. The message was clear, there was nowhere to run, and no one left to protect her. The secondary puppet had been broken, and now, the master was coming for the main prize. The shadows in Sia's apartment seemed to come alive. Before she could even scream, a heavy cloth was pressed over her face. The world spun into darkness, and the last thing she felt was the strong, cold grip of the man she had tried to kill. When Sia finally opened her eyes, she gasped. She wasn't in a basement or a jail cell. She was lying on a soft, silk bed in a room she knew by heart. It was the penthouse where she and Jung-Hoon had lived 2 years ago. Everything was exactly the same. The same expensive paintings were on the walls, and the same jasmine perfume was in the air. It was like time had never moved, except for the heavy locks on the doors and the bars on the floor-to-ceiling windows. Jung-Hoon was standing by the window, looking out at the city lights. He looked like a king who had returned to his castle. He turned around, and the scar on his face caught the light. "Welcome home, Sia," he said quietly. He walked over and placed a velvet box on the nightstand. Inside was a diamond ring, the same one he had given her before the betrayal. "Put it on. Tonight, we are having dinner." Sia backed away, her heart thumping against her ribs. "You can't do this. You can't force me to play house after what we did to each other." "I'm not forcing you," Jung-Hoon replied, his voice as smooth as glass. "But the police are looking for you because of the money you stole. My enemies are looking for you because they think you know where my gold is. Outside these walls, you are a dead woman. In here, you are my fiancée. It is the only way you survive." The dinner was a nightmare. They sat at a long table covered in white linen and silver. Jung-Hoon acted like a perfect gentleman, cutting her steak and pouring her wine. He talked about the weather and old memories, but his eyes never smiled. It was a game of cat and mouse. Every time he touched her hand, Sia felt a shiver of fear, yet her body remembered the warmth he used to give her. He didn't hit her or yell. Instead, he played with her mind. He reminded her of the songs they liked and the dreams they shared, only to follow it with a cold reminder that she had destroyed it all. He was keeping her in a beautiful cage, surrounding her with the love she had used to betray him. Sia realized that this was his real revenge. He wasn't going to kill her, he was going to make her live in the ghost of the life she had murdered, never knowing if the man across the table wanted to kiss her or crush her. One night, while Jung-Hoon was away on business, the penthouse felt as quiet as a tomb. Sia couldn't sleep. She wandered into the library, a room filled with the smell of old paper and leather. On the large oak desk, she noticed a drawer that was slightly open. Inside was a thick brown envelope with her name written on it in Jung-Hoon's sharp, neat handwriting. Her heart raced as she opened it. She expected to find more evidence of Jung-Hoon's crimes, but what she saw made her world stop. The file was full of secret police reports and photos from the night her brother died. She saw a picture of the alleyway where it happened, but there was a detail she had never seen before. In the background of one photo, standing under a street lamp, was a younger version of Detective Kong. Sia's hands shook as she read the hidden transcript of a phone call. The hero detective hadn't been chasing the mafia that night. He had been working for a rival gang. Her brother hadn't been killed by Jung-Hoon's orders. Her brother had found out that Detective Kong was a dirty cop who was selling police secrets. To save his own career, Kong had pulled the trigger himself and then blamed the mafia to cover his tracks. Sia felt like she couldn't breathe. For years, her hatred for Jung-Hoon had been the only thing keeping her going. She had ruined Jung-Hoon's life to get justice for her brother, but she had been sleeping in the bed of the man who actually committed the murder. There was a small note at the bottom of the file from Jung-Hoon. It said, "I knew you would never believe me if I told you. I let you hate me because I didn't want you to know the person you trusted was a monster. I thought if I took the blame, you could at least live a life without fear." Sia collapsed into the desk chair, tears stinging her eyes. She realized that Jung-Hoon hadn't been her enemy. He had been a shield. He had allowed her to betray him, shoot him, and throw him into a river, all to protect her from the crushing truth about her hero. The king she had tried to destroy was the only person who had ever truly tried to save her. She looked at the diamond ring on her finger and felt a deep, heavy pain in her chest. Everything she thought was right was wrong, and the man she had treated like a monster was the only one with a heart. The truth felt like a heavy stone in Sia's chest. She sat on the floor of the library, the papers scattered around her like broken glass. Every breath she took hurt. She had spent years planning to ruin Jung-Hoon, thinking she was a hero seeking justice. But instead, she had been a puppet for a murderer. She had shot the man who loved her to protect the man who killed her brother. The sound of the front door opening made her jump. Jung-Hoon walked into the room, looking tired. His coat was damp from the rain, and he moved with a slight limp that he hadn't had 2 years ago. When he saw the open file on the desk, he stopped. He didn't look angry. He just looked sad. "Now you know," he said softly. Sia stood up, her legs shaking. She walked toward him, seeing him clearly for the first time. She didn't see a scary mafia boss anymore. She saw the jagged scar on his face from the night on the bridge. She saw the way he gripped his side, where the bullet had hit him. She realized these weren't just physical wounds, they were scars she had given him. He had carried the weight of her hatred and the pain of her betrayal, all while trying to keep her safe from Detective Kong. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sia sobbed, the tears streaming down her face. "I tried to kill you. I destroyed your life. Why did you let me do it?" Jung-Hoon reached out, his hand hovering near her face before he pulled it back, as if he didn't think he was allowed to touch her anymore. "Because you were the only thing I had left that was good. If I told you the truth, you would have been in danger. I'd rather you hate me and be alive than love me and be dead." Sia felt a wave of deep regret that almost knocked her over. She thought about all the times he had been kind to her, and how she had responded with coldness and lies. She had taken his heart and used it against him. She reached out and grabbed his hand, pressing it against her cheek. His skin was cold, but his eyes were filled with a love that she didn't deserve. She had been so busy looking for a monster in him that she never noticed the monster standing right next to her. Now, she realized she had lost everything. She had broken the only person who truly cared for her. As she looked into Jung-Hoon's scarred face, she knew that saying, "I'm sorry," would never be enough to fix the beautiful life she had thrown away. The peace of the penthouse did not last long. Just as Sia was beginning to understand the depth of her mistake, the world outside exploded. A loud crash echoed through the hallway as the heavy front doors were kicked open. The sound of heavy boots filled the quiet home. Detective Kong had arrived, but he wasn't there to save anyone. He had found out that Jung-Hoon was alive, and he knew that Sia had seen the secret files. His mask of a hero had finally slipped, revealing the face of a killer who was desperate to hide his crimes. "Go to the back room, Sia. Lock the door," Jung-Hoon shouted. He pushed her toward the library, his voice full of the old authority he used to have as a king. Through the crack in the door, Sia saw Detective Kong enter the living room. He wasn't alone. He had brought a small group of rogue police officers, men who were loyal to his money rather than the law. They all carried heavy weapons, and their faces were hidden behind black masks. Kong looked around the beautiful room with a wicked smile, his eyes landing on Jung-Hoon. "I should have made sure you didn't float 2 years ago," Kong sneered, raising his pistol. "But I won't make the same mistake twice. Tonight, both you and the girl will disappear for good." Jung-Hoon didn't look afraid. Even though he was outnumbered and still weak from his old injuries, he stood tall. He stepped in front of the library door, using his own body as a shield to hide Sia. He knew he couldn't win this fight, but he didn't care. His only goal was to buy enough time for Sia to reach the private elevator that led to the secret garage. "You've already lost, Kong," Jung-Hoon said, his voice calm and steady. "The files are already sent to the city's biggest newspapers. Even if you kill me, the truth is out. You're finished." Kang's face twisted in rage. "Then I'll take you to hell with me." The room erupted in gunfire. Jung-Hoon pulled a small remote from his pocket and pressed it, triggering a series of smoke canisters he had hidden for a moment just like this. Thick, gray smoke filled the penthouse, making it impossible to see. "Run, Sia! Now!" Jung-Hoon yelled through the noise. Sia watched through tears as Jung-Hoon charged into the smoke toward the gunman. He was choosing to die one last time, not for power or money, but to give her the chance to live. He was the monster who was sacrificing everything, while the hero was the one trying to tear her world apart. As she crawled toward the escape hatch, she realized this was the ultimate payback. Jung-Hoon was finally proving that his love was more powerful than Kang's hate. The smoke was thick and smelled like burnt metal, but Sia did not run. She reached the secret elevator, her hand trembling on the handle, but then she stopped. She looked at the dark hallway and thought about the 2 years she had spent hating the wrong man. If she left now, she would be safe, but she would be alone. She realized that she would rather die by Jung-Hoon's side than live another day in a lie. She turned back and saw a discarded pistol on the floor, dropped by one of Kang's men in the confusion. Sia had never held a gun before. It was heavy and cold, a terrifying weight in her hands. She took a deep breath, remembering her brother and the man who had truly tried to protect her. She stepped back into the living room. Through the shifting gray smoke, she saw Jung-Hoon. He was pinned behind a fallen marble table, his shoulder bleeding, while Kang and his last 2 men moved in for the kill. Kang was laughing, a sound that made Sia's blood turn to ice. "Goodbye, King," Kang shouted, leveling his weapon. Sia didn't think. She stepped out of the shadows and fired. The loud bang kicked her arms back, and the bullet struck the wall near Kang, making him dive for cover. Jung-Hoon looked up, his eyes widening in shock when he saw Sia standing there. He didn't yell at her to run this time. He saw the fire in her eyes and realized she had made her choice. Together, he grunted, reaching out his hand. Sia scrambled over to him, sliding behind the table. For the first time, they were not hunter and prey. They were a team. As the rogue officers closed in, Jung-Hoon and Sia fought side by side. He moved with the grace of a professional, and she followed his lead, her heart pounding with a strange, fierce strength. In the final moments of the chaos, Jung-Hoon saw an opening. He lunged through the smoke, tackling Kang to the floor. The 2 men struggled, but Jung-Hoon was fueled by years of hidden pain. He wrestled the gun away and held it to the detective's head. "This is for her brother," Jung-Hoon whispered. A final shot echoed through the penthouse, and the man who had murdered Sia's family was gone. But as the silence returned, Jung-Hoon slumped forward. A deep red stain was spreading across his chest, much worse than the wounds from before. He had won the battle, but the price was his life. Sia caught him before he hit the ground, pulling his head into her lap as the sirens grew louder in the distance. The sirens grew louder, and the flashing lights painted the walls of the penthouse in a steady beat of red and blue. Sia held Jung-Hoon close, her tears falling onto his scarred face. She begged him to stay awake, but his eyes slowly closed as the medics rushed into the room. She felt his hand slip from hers, and for a moment, the world went completely silent. She thought she had lost him forever, just like that night on the bridge. But the king was not so easy to kill. 6 months later, the city of Seoul looked different. Detective Kang's crimes were known by everyone, and the dirty parts of the police force had been cleaned out. The mystery of the Mafia Boss had become even bigger. No one knew where Jung-Hoon had gone. On the night he was taken to the hospital, he had vanished from his bed before the sun came up. He left no note and no trail. He simply became a ghost once again, fading back into the shadows where he felt he belonged. He had left one thing behind, though. He had signed over every piece of his empire to Sia. Every building, every secret account, and every ounce of power now belonged to her. He had given her the throne he spent his life building, a final gift to ensure she would never be hurt again. Sia now sat in a large, leather chair in the center of the syndicate's headquarters. The room was cold and smelled of expensive wood and old secrets. She looked different now. The softness in her eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet strength. She dressed in dark colors, and on her right hand, she wore the heavy diamond ring Jung-Hoon had given her. She was no longer a victim or a puppet. She was the Queen of Scars, the woman who ruled the underworld with a fair but firm hand. Every evening, when the sun set behind the tall buildings, Sia would look out at the Han River. She knew that Jung-Hoon was out there somewhere. She knew he was watching her from the darkness, making sure she was safe. He had left because he thought he was a monster, but Sia knew the truth. He was the man who had taught her what real love looked like. A love that was willing to disappear so that she could shine. She kept a single black lily in a vase on her desk. It was a reminder that the past was never truly gone. As she looked at the door, she didn't feel afraid anymore. She felt a deep, quiet hope. She would rule his empire and keep his secrets, and she would wait. No matter how many years it took, she would keep the seat next to her empty, waiting for the day that Ghost decided to finally come home.